I want to welcome you to the Virtual Training Institute Day 2. Today we have Ramona Kunkel with us to talk about project-based learning in the ABE classroom. And as we get started, I would like to launch a poll to find out who we have with us today. So if you can take a moment and choose one of the following on your screen, it'll give us an idea of who's in our webinar today. Right, we have a healthy group with us today, and it looks like the majority of people, as could probably be expected by the title, are ABE instructors. We also have a great deal of instructional specialists, and then equally divided between program administrators and ESL instructors. So we appreciate that you're here. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Ramona as soon as I say one more thing. If there are links or content that we want you to have, we will place it into the chat room. But for you to communicate with us, I'm going to need you to use the questions box. So the questions box can be used to ask questions to any presenter. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ramona.
Thank you, Ellen. So welcome, and this is project-based learning in the ABE classroom. I see that we have some ESL instructors. So I want to say that I titled this for ABE classroom because this is what my experience is based on, but I can see where you could certainly use this in an ESL classroom also. So I am Ramona Kunkel. I am an adult education program specialist with the Maryland Department of Labor. So I want to say that, so here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover what project-based learning is, getting started, some project-based learning examples, skills learned and practiced, and the end product. So everything in this presentation is based on my experience and what I did as an instructor. So I worked in a small community-based program in Baltimore City, and we did a significant amount of project-based learning. So again, this is just based on my experience. I took what I did through a lot of trial and error and figured out what worked and didn't work for me. So, you might need to do some tweaking for yourself, but again, this is just what I found to work best. So we're going to talk about what is project-based learning. So let me get rid of, move things around here a bit. So project-based learning is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. So that's sort of the official definition of it. What we did in the program where I worked, it wasn't quite this complex, but you'll see how it worked. So this is just a little brief diagram to show you kind of the difference between just doing a project and project-based learning. So sometimes when we do projects, it's the teacher has the knowledge, they give the students the directions, then the student follows those directions, student learns a bunch of facts by following those directions, and then they just present those facts. But in project-based learning, there's a deeper level of thinking that goes with this. So students devise their own directions, and we're going to talk about to what extent that can happen. They test and revise their own directions. They learn the information, they develop skills. So this isn't just about reading something and learning something, it's about developing actual skills that they will need later on. And then Students apply their knowledge and skills to solve real-world problems, and then they're ready to move forward and answer even more questions. So why project-based learning? I found that project-based learning really works well for multi-level instruction, and I'm going to give you an example of that a little bit later in my presentation. It's a way to bring the class together for a common purpose, for a common goal. So if you have learners at a variety of levels, many times they're each doing their own individual thing. And to some degree, that's still going to be true, but they're still working on a common project, a common topic, which helps kind of create some unity in your class. If you have a program that has multiple classes, either on campus or within your building, it's a way to bring your classes together, again, for a common purpose. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's a way for students to take ownership of their learning. So regardless of what the structure is, students are taking responsibility for their own learning and doing their own research and putting together the project. It allows them to think independently, but at the same time, there can also be some cooperative learning and working as a team, and students are able to produce a product. Too often, and it's not a criticism, but students, they work through a lesson, they answer the questions, and then they move on. And that's all well and good. That's certainly a part of instruction. But with project-based learning, you actually have a project. And the project ideally will involve some sort of creativity, just to, again, get them to think in a different way. It also encompasses skills that go beyond academics. So social skills, teamwork, and cooperation. It also includes independent learning. It builds self-esteem. And that's primarily because at the end, they have a real sense of accomplishment. I did this myself. I did this on my own. I did my own research. I put it together. I creatively came up with my product. Presentation skills, and then also creativity. So one thing that I found in doing project-based learning is that sometimes it can really help you to think of some things that you might want to do before you actually dive into project-based learning. And it really kind of depends upon the level and where they're at. So I'm just going to give you some tips and tricks of what I found worked for me. So there's some prep work. And I just say this because you want to have this planned out as much as you possibly can so that you're not sort of fumbling through and just trying to figure it out as you go along. So here's just some things that you might want to think about, just even with picking the topic. So is the instructor going to pick the topic? Is the instructor going to say, you know what, I think students really need to be inspired to learn about whatever, and that's what we're going to learn. I'm going to have them work on, because that seems to be an area that a lot of students are really struggling. Or you could have, or you might ask, am I going to pick a topic that I know is of interest to my class? And sometimes that's a good one. That's a good strategy to use if you've never done this before, because then they've already have an interest in it. So they're going to be a little bit more inspired by it, and they're going to be a little bit more motivated, enthusiastic, especially if, again, if this is the first time you're doing it, it might increase the likelihood of it being a successful experience. Or you can ask the class, what topic they would like to study. You could just put it out there. Is there anything that anybody's really, really interested in working on? And that can be a little dicey because you might get, 5 different topics being thrown out. Another one is the instructor can present a few choices and then ask the class by way of raising their hand what topic they would like to pick. So then you want to think out how the whole project is going to play out so that you can start preparing and start gathering materials that you might need for the project. So let's just say you want to have your students do collages. So you might want to start gathering magazines that are appropriate for that topic. So let's just say you do it on food. You might want to start gathering up cooking or nutrition magazines. You also want to think about computer skills, specifically researching and typing. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. You might want to have them do shadow boxes or posters. So, start gathering things like construction paper, markers, pens, color pencils, pipe cleaners, yarn, whatever you think would be appropriate for the project that they're working on. So as far as computer skills go and researching, it really depends upon the level where your students are at the beginning. So if you have some lower level learners, you might want to do this before you even get to the project-based learning project, because it may just be an almost overload in the amount of information that they're trying to absorb and that they're trying to learn and trying to get through just in one project. So if they're high level, they might already have some of those skills already in place. So you might just be able to go ahead and move forward. But these are just some things that I found, and by no means an all exhaustive list, but even just talking about search engines and what a search engine means and how a search even works. You might even want to spend some time about what words to use when searching. I know I did this with my students, and so we picked a topic and I would ask them, what words might you want to put in your search to figure out what it is that you want to get? And you might be surprised with some things that they'll put in. And so you want to make sure that the words that they're using are relevant for what they're looking for. So, experiment with different combinations of words. Well, let's try this combination, see what we get. Let's try this combination, see if we get any better information. Also, the use of quotation marks, to really narrow in your search. A big one is reliable sources. So, for example, if you find an article about the benefits of smoking and you see that it's put out by the tobacco industry, you might think to yourself, well, that might be a slightly biased article. So just talking through that and seeing, where did that source come from? And do they have an agenda? Do they have a bias? And could that possibly be playing into what information is in that article? And then also, is the article relevant? Sometimes we all kind of go off on tangents and we find, something that looks really interesting, but it may not necessarily be specifically focused on their topic. So, just kind of make sure that they're not going all over the place. Okay, then we have computer skills typing. So you may want them to type up their final product. So they do all this research, and you might want them to just go ahead and sort of type up what I'll call a report. So you might want to provide some instruction that integrates typing skills into a lesson prior to whatever activity they're going to do. So you can have them take any assignment and just have them type up short answers or a paragraph, anything, just to get them used to the typing process so that they can get familiar with the computer itself, with just typing, with the keyboard functions, and then also talking about the structure such as paragraphing and indenting, bolding the title, centering the title. It doesn't have to be really complicated. You can make it as simple or as complicated as you want. You could even have something like introducing charts and graphs, whatever. But, just make sure that you're not trying to teach too many skills all within that project. Okay, so the project structure. So once you've decided on a topic, then you want to decide on what kind of structure you want to have. So there are a couple of options. You can have each student decides on their final project. They all do their own thing. One might decide that they want to do a collage. Somebody else might want to work in a group and they decide that they want to do a skit. Or you can have every student produce the same final project. Again, if you're doing this for the first time, in my opinion, I think it's easier to have consistency. Otherwise, you might find that it's a little overwhelming to try and manage all that. So if you have everybody kind of doing the same thing at one time, it's a little bit easier to manage. So therefore, you might need a little bit more structure for the lower levels. And for example, like deciding on a set of questions to be answered in the project. And I'm going to give you an example of that a little bit later in one of my examples. So then you want to think through the schedule. So what kind of schedule do you want to have? I would suggest that you work on this project for at least a month. Stretch it out for a month. That's supposed to be the whole purpose of that, is not just this sort of a encapsulated project where you're cramming it all into a week. You want to have them spreading those skills out over a period of time. So you can pick one day a week, and for 1/3 to 1/2 of the class, they work on this project, or maybe just one full class every other week. You decide what you think might work best. And then I would encourage you to use your computer lab time for research and typing. Though I realize that not everybody has access to a computer lab, and I'm going to tell you what I did when that was when I did project-based learning before the age of the internet. You can imagine that. So participation, how will the project be assigned? So is everybody going to do the individual project? Are you going to have them work in pairs? Are they going to have small groups? I would recommend no more than 3 to a group, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, my reasons for that. Or is each student going to decide? So for example, some might decide, I want to do my own thing. I really have no interest in working with anybody else. And others might want to work with another student or with a small group. I'll get this out in a minute. Okay, so small group or pairs. So you carefully want to select or monitor who will work together in small groups, because this can get a little tricky if you don't manage it. So you might have one student may do most of the work. So maybe they're a higher functioning student. They have better reading skills, or they're just more organized. Or maybe they just kind of decide that they're the ones that are the most equipped to do it, and they're going to take over. On the other hand, a student might be delegated most of the work. So let's just say you have 5 students working in a group, and 4 of them say, yeah, I think Ramona should be in charge of this. And so maybe I don't really want to be in charge, but they've decided that I'm going to be in charge. And that's not really what you're looking for. So more than 3 students in a group may lead to some students to do little or nothing. So there might be some students that think, oh, wow, this is great. You know, I'm just 1 out of 5. So I can just kind of sit back and not really do a whole lot. Nobody's going to really notice. Again, that's not the purpose of this project. So you want everybody to be involved. So sometimes limiting it to 3 students in a small group can kind of help that out. I do want to say one more quick thing about this. If you have them work in pairs, you might be surprised at some of the pairings. There was one project that I did, and it was in a class that was everything from a non-reader through a 5th grade reading level. And I had a student who had probably about a 1st grade reading level got paired up with somebody who had about a 5th grade reading level. They picked their own, they decided to match up. And you might think that that would not work. I'll tell you, it worked beautifully. So, you know, sometimes a pairing that you think might not work well, it worked very, very well. So just sometimes think outside the box. So I'm going to talk about some examples that I did at the program where I worked. So one of the things that almost across the board, all students in our morning classes were interested in were animals. Anything about animals, they were all over it. It didn't matter what the animal was, they were really interested. So we happened to have 3 classes that all met in the morning. We were in one building. So one class was about a 1st to 2nd grade reading level, another class was about a 2nd to 3rd, and then the other class was about a 4th to a 6th grade reading level. The lower levels did have a class assistant. What I should say is we did have a class assistant, and she could kind of roam around if needed. Each student did work independently, and we picked this because we knew that the students were interested in this topic. So it was just kind of a nice way. I believe it was one of the first projects that we did, and it was just a nice way to get students interested in this type of learning. So what we did for specifically the lower levels, because we didn't want students to just sort of be floundering and not really have any direction, is as a class, we determine what questions would be answered in the project. So this is just an example of the things that they then had to find in their research. So for example, how much does the animal weigh? How long does it live? What does it eat? Where does it live? How does it live? Like in a tree, in the ground, in the grass. And then one interesting fact about that animal. And again, what this did is it made it so that students were like, well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to put down. I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for. They knew what they were supposed to be looking for. And I'm going to show you how we did that with the lower levels. So we did a lot of work with graphic organizers. And the beauty of this is this really helps cut down on plagiarism. So here's an example. So all they would do is just put in words or small phrases, not complete sentences, or that would lend itself to some potential plagiarism. So for example, if they're doing their project on giraffes, you know, they would put in the middle, what a giraffe eats. Okay, it eats leaves, trees, shrubs, flowers, and buds. And then they would take that information later on, once they've gathered and they've researched everything that they need to find, then they put it all together and they write those sentences themselves. So again, cuts down on the amount of direct copying from the source. So one of the things that we did is we created charts and graphs on the information that they collected. So we used poster board to create a graph. So one poster board had how much the animal weighed, another one was how big the animal got, either tall or their length, and then another one for the life expectancy. And what was great about that was it required us to think about how do we want to lay that information out? What makes the most sense? You know, does it make sense to put our animals in alphabetical order? Does it make more sense to start with the largest one and then work down to the smallest one? So again, it was just, you know, getting their brains to think in a different way. It was creative, but charts and graphs are something that they're going to need to know for just life as a life skill. We also created a booklet, and so it wound up being a typed report. So, you know, some found a picture on the internet of their animal, they printed it out, and they put it on the front of construction paper, and then they glued their typed pages and put them on construction paper and created like a booklet, just to, again, creative, just so they could produce an actual product at the end. And then what we did is we had a deadline date that your project has to be done by this day. And we moved everybody into one classroom. And so all the students from all three of those levels presented their information. And what was great about that was that it didn't matter what your level was, whether you're at a first grade reading level or you're at a sixth grade reading level, everybody had something to share. Everybody had some information that they could teach the rest of the students. And that's what really sort of lifts the students up and builds their self-esteem, because too often, especially at the lower level, I think students can sometimes feel like they don't really have anything of value to share, or, you know, they're not smart enough. And this, you know, shows that everybody has something to share and everybody has something that is worth, you know, being listened to. I will say one thing that we did do, because we weren't in Baltimore City, and this, I realize this isn't feasible for all programs, is because we had some unrestricted money, we were able to take our students to the zoo in Maryland. And so actually what we did is we had them pick out their animal based on the animals at the zoo in a separate related project like this. And then when we went to the zoo, you know, they would point out their animal. Oh, look, you know, look, Bobby, you know, there's your orangutan or whatever. So that was just kind of a neat thing to do, just to expand on that project. Another project that we did was countries. And this was in my 0 to 5th grade reading level class. I did not have assistants, so I say that because it is possible to do this with multi-level. So each student picked out a country that they wanted to study. Each student worked independently, but others chose, some chose to work independently and some chose to work in pairs. So this was actually before the internet. Well, the internet was around, but it wasn't around like it is now. Back then, you know, we had a computer lab, but we used floppy disks, for those who remember what a floppy disk is. So because it was before the use of the internet like it is now, what I did is I went to the library with a list of the countries that my students had picked with the students so that I knew what their level was, and I actually checked out the level appropriate books from the library and then brought them into the classroom so that they had them to use. You know, another option is to actually take your students to the library, but this class met at night, so it really wasn't the best option for us. But my point is that even if you don't have access to computers, because sometimes even using a phone can be really, really cumbersome, there are other alternatives. So trying to make this a little bit interesting. Now, this was back in the day when, you know, we used snail mail. we actually did a letter writing activity. Now you could probably just fill out the form on the internet and send it off to, the tourism agency for their country. But what was so great about this is that they actually got something in the mail of the tourism information for this country, and they were just thrilled. They were just thrilled that somebody would respond to them and would send them the information that they requested. So what we did is we watched VCR tapes, now it would be DVDs, of different countries, just showing the landscape, the culture, the clothing, the food, because the reality of it is that for my classes, some of the students had literally never been outside of Baltimore. So they knew nothing other than the city. So for them, this was the only way they were ever going to get exposure to anything different other than their little world. And then what we did is they all create a report, and then they read the report to the entire class. Real quickly, we did one with oceanography. Students worked in pairs. They picked a topic that had to do with oceanography. Some picked whales, sharks, Mariana Trench. They created a report. Again, they presented the class. Again, we had the luxury of being in Baltimore, so we actually took a trip to the National Aquarium. Back then, they used to have sort of a program called the aquarium takes a dive for 5 after 5 or something like that. So it was $5 on Friday after 5 o'clock. So students were willing to pay the $5 to go to the aquarium. And so we went there and, visited the aquarium and, talked about some of the things that they had done in their reports and maybe some of the, the animals that we were seeing while at the aquarium. Again, just a way to sort of, break it up and expand their experiences. And then the last one I want to talk about is we did one on humane education. So again, it was the same program, those same 3 morning classes. So there was animal rights, human rights, and environmental. And as luck had it, we just let our classes pick, but they had to agree as a class. And each one of those 3 classes picked each one of these different topics. So it was just great how that worked out. So when it came time for their presentation, one class is presenting on animal rights, another one on human rights, and another class on environmental. So we had the students work either independently or in pairs. We decided that they would create a poster. Now, because we were in our own building, they were allowed to display their posters in the hallway, and then students could see what other students did. And then each student presented their information during the presentation time. Okay. So skills learned and practiced. So, I can imagine there might be some that say, well, this sounds like just like a whole lot of fun and just nothing but fun and games, which is okay because learning can be fun. But I put this together just so that you can see that it does also include lots of skills. So when they when they write up their projects, it includes punctuation, capitalization, sentence structure and grammar, signal words like first, then, before. They have to organize and categorize lists, and inferencing and drawing conclusions. Also, finding the main idea and key details. So if they're researching about an animal, they have to find the details of what does that animal eat? Where does it live? Scanning, definitely paraphrasing because we don't want them copying. Summarizing, even sequencing, evaluating claims in a text, so going back to the internet and finding sources and making sure that those are valid resources, and then understanding vocabulary in context. So as far as functional skills learned, understanding high frequency words and phrases, reading and creating charts, tables, maps, diagrams, and paragraphs, and determining the authenticity of a website. So going back to the example of picking a country and using maps, you might want to have the learner, so let's just say they pick Germany. You might give them a map of Europe and then have them have to color in Germany so that they can see where Germany is in relationship to the rest of Europe. And then you might want to give the learner a map of the world so that they can see where it is in relationship to where we are. Because again, a lot of our learners, I would argue, probably don't have a strong sense of where other things are geographically outside of Maryland or even Baltimore or wherever it is that they live. So again, it's opening up their world and expanding their knowledge base. So now I'm going to talk about the end product. So at the end, and again, this is just what we did. You can make this whatever you want. So each class presents. So you might just have one class that's a multi-level class, so just your class presents. But we brought all the classes together so that they all could present and share information. Then they would read their report, they would present their product. So let's just say they did a collage. They would talk about their collage, what's on it, what it means, how it relates to their topic, how it relates to the information that they found. You can even, if they're doing a small group or even an individual, they can put on a skit that would, again, relate to their product. We actually required applause. We pretty much said, everybody has put in a lot of work, so we want to acknowledge the hard work, the effort that everybody put into this, and we are going to applaud at the end and just show our encouragement and that we're proud of them and all the great things that they were able to put together. In some cases, we did a gallery walk. So if everybody's doing their own thing, we might put it out on the tables, and then students could just kind of like walk around and see what products the other learners produced. So my final thought is fun plus learning equals the best educational experience. So when I found this, I thought this was just sort of a perfect quote. I guess my parting pearls of wisdom are, yes, this can be fun. It can also be a lot of work, but in my experience, it really makes a big difference. It's just a way for students to be able to work in a totally different way. That's not, just strictly sitting in their chair and working out of a workbook or doing a worksheet. Sure, we absolutely need to have those. I'm not saying that they're not good, that's not good teaching, but it's just something to do that's a little bit different, that expands the way that they think, and just their educational experience. So does anybody have any questions?
Ramona, this is Ellen. It looks like we do have a couple of questions.
Okay. And
so one was for you to share some examples, and I think you certainly did that. You accomplished that in your presentation. But one other question is, how can this be modified for online instruction with where we are right now?
Okay, good question. So I think you can, it's going to be a little more challenging, but I think you can do it in that, you can still pick the topic. So in a way, some ways it's maybe even a little bit easier, I guess I could say, because that they're going to have access to the internet. So you might want to have your learners pick their topic, and then again, you can talk about, all right, so what things are we going to find? Let's agree on what subtopics we're going to look for. So one exercise you might do is you might have students start to do their research. But before they get too far into it, you might want to have them submit their resources to you so that you can look over them and you can maybe make an analysis as to whether you think those are legitimate resources or not. And if you think that there might be some that are questionable, just talk it out with your student. What you could do is you could even do this, I hate to say it like this, but sort of even as a group project, maybe the first time, just for them to walk through it, just because this is a tough time for everybody. Let's face it, everybody's trying to figure stuff out. Everybody's trying to figure out where to go with this. But they can still do some of the research on their own. And if they have questions, asking you, well, does this look like a good source? Because they may not know and they may not have any idea, so they can send that to you and you can look it over. And then once they have it pulled together, they can still, I'm guessing a lot of programs are using Zoom or some other platform. So you can still have your students present their project. And they could even, I'm not sure how feasible this might be, but students can even draw pictures or really be creative and draw something or somehow put something creative together with materials that they have. If they happen to have access to a printer, I know that some people don't, they can even print out pictures. Whatever could make it interesting, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have to, that it would prevent them from putting together, say, a product and again presenting it. You can give them access to being the presenter and have them present in front of the class. Again, I don't know how feasible it would be. You'd have to figure that out internally. But again, you could even work with another teacher and say, hey, let's do this project. And then you bring everybody together in one class, one Zoom class, and have everybody present that way. I don't know if that makes sense, if that would work. Again, it's a lot of trial and error. And right now, a lot of what we're doing is trial and error. So, you might want to just start small. Start with a really small project and just see how it works and take it from there.
Thank you, Ramona. Those are great suggestions, and certainly it is applicable to an online setting. So I think someone calling in had a question. Could you repeat the quote at the end? Fun plus learning.
Yes, it is fun plus learning equals the best educational experience. And that is not my quote. The quote comes from Tamara L. Chilver, and that is Chilver.
One other question about how you assess sources. So the question is, how do you assess sources that are locally informed but not quite there in academic rigor?
Not there. I'm trying to understand the question.
Yeah, I'm trying to decipher it myself. I'm thinking.
I want to make sure that I understand the question. Locally informed, but not in academic rigor. I think I'm going to need a little bit more information.
Yeah, Bijnu, if you could maybe clarify your question just a little bit so that Ramona can address it. A couple of thanks for sharings, great information. I mean, without further information about that question, maybe just a comment about that's a great learning experience to help your students understand how to assess sources.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we did is we would actually pick resources, and we would actually make it into a class lesson. And so we would have the learners go to these different resources and then talk out as a group these resources and say, well, you know, do we think that this is valid? Do we think that this is accurate information? Well, what might be the problem with this? And in some cases, if it was a higher level class, we would give them again a sheet, and they would have to evaluate. And there were certain criteria, how easy is it to navigate? And so we would really get them to think about that website and whether the information was something that was worth their time. So it may actually require a totally separate lesson where you just focus on that and you talk through what could be the possible pitfalls of that website and what are the great things about it. Yeah, this looks great. Sure, I would use this in a heartbeat.
Thank you. Yeah, such a definitely useful skill, both in life and for whatever they do career-wise or in post-secondary education. That's certainly a valuable skill for them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. From the questions, I can see that your valuable content was definitely appreciated by the field. Thank you so much, Ramona.
Sure, thank you. And I want to thank everybody for giving up part of their day to attend. I appreciate your time and your attention.
Absolutely. And if everyone can turn their attention to the chat box, I've posted our feedback survey link right there. It'll just take you a couple of minutes to do, but we really value your feedback. This is our second virtual training institute, and we are looking for continuous improvement as we plan our next one. And just as a reminder, all of the resources, the slides, the recordings, they will be available on our website, just as after the first virtual training institute. So you can look there after the institute for all of the resources. So thank you again, Ramona. It was fantastic information.
Sure.
I hope the rest of you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we have more sessions coming at noon, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. So please check the schedule and join us again. Have a great afternoon.